Just great. Always happy to get to have a quick talk where we help people try to simplify things about college planning.
Yes, and today, even though the title's not right, I'm fixing it now. We're talking about the difference between the SAT and the ACT tests, and
Yeah,
what's going to be right for your kiddo.
absolutely. Yeah, I think this is something that, like, especially as we're into March, like if you've got a junior, it's definitely time to figure out, is SAT or ACT the better test for your student? And if you've got a sophomore, even, you might be considering maybe this summer starting to, get that in mind. Like you'd really like to be done with this by the end of junior year, by June of junior year, if you can. So now is the time that a lot of people are sort of waking up and going, okay, we got to figure this thing out, right?
Well, Bobby, is that even possible for families right now? I know juniors and some seniors are just trying to get it in. Are they opening up the capacity for these tests?
Yeah, I think they've stopped canceling so many tests now. They've got the COVID protocols, I think, down, I guess, and there are fewer places locking down. So I think there's more chance of being able to take the test. Yeah, last fall and last summer, I had lots and lots of students get lots and lots of tests canceled, and it was really frustrating. And also, there's been a big, I guess, a lot of crowds of students signing up for the January and March tests that are happening right now because there were students who didn't get to take it last fall. Even I've seen a lot of seniors taking the test, just now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I think that backlog is mostly gone. And so now we're back to a more reasonable sort of schedule. Of course, still there are protocols there and stuff. But yeah, I think it's time to start thinking about it. And I think the very first thing is that people, like, we all always just think of one test before the other, just in the same way that you, like, when you first start thinking of colleges, you just think of applying to that college where it's nearby, it's the big one in your state, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
goes there, right? And so just because you know 40 people who've gone there doesn't mean that's the college you should apply to. And just because you took the PSAT every year doesn't mean the SAT is the test for you. That's just how the PSAT works. They've gotten to where every high school student in the nation, takes it. And so you really want to think about what's going to be a better test for you, whether it's the SAT or ACT, because despite any, rumors people hear over the years, they are both equally accepted by all colleges everywhere. Every college accepts both, except for, as we talked about a few weeks ago, colleges that have gone fully test blind. They don't accept any tests, but there are very few fully test blind colleges. And then test optional colleges, you can submit it or you cannot submit it. But if your GPA is less than perfect, it's going to be to your advantage to get a good SAT or ACT score and submit it.
Right. So it's still important to get those tests taken if you can, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And to your point earlier, Bobby, I know when I went to was applying to colleges,
mhm,
the college that I was applying to didn't take SAT, but that was a
mhm.
long time ago,
Sure.
right? So I don't want parents to think that life's the same as it was when we went to college, because it's not. We know that.
Yep.
So what's your best advice when parents are trying to help their students figure out, do I take the ACT or do I take the SAT?
Okay, so, like, the simplest thing is, I mean, you've probably got a PSAT score. Most students take it even sophomore year in school as part of their school. So you've probably got a score on the PSAT. The simplest thing you could do is simply just at home take a practice ACT and see how that score compares, right? There are some free practice ACTs you can find online. There's just one or two of them. But I'm always happy if anyone contacts me to just send them. I'll send you a real, actual ACT that is, a free practice test that you can take at home, and then you can just see how you do and compare. And I can help you compare the numbers if you have any question. And that's kind of step one. And step two is, which test does your student like better, right? Like, they probably don't like the SAT very much, and so they probably think everything's like that. But then when they take the ACT, they're probably going to say, I thought this was a lot easier, but I totally ran out of time, and so I didn't
Mhm.
get a very good score. But that's really important to pay attention to, because they liked it and they thought it was easier. What happens to students on the ACT is with a lot of them is they're taking the reading section and they're getting lots of questions right. And then suddenly there's 5 minutes left on the test and they're only halfway through it. Right. And so if they just could manage their time better, they could get a really, really good score. And that's what test prep is about, is learning how to manage your time and use your skills to get questions right as quickly as possible without overthinking, without sitting there and just staring at the passage and zoning out and reading. And so, I mean, the short answer is, with good test prep strategies, most students are going to find the ACT to be an easier test.
Well, I can
Right?
tell you personally, the whole timing issue for me,
Mhm.
like it wigs me out. So
Yeah,
I get anxious because I'm like, okay, I know I'm, running against the clock. So for
absolutely.
me, yeah. So I mean, you got to know your kid and you've got to have these conversations with them, right?
Oh, for sure, right.
Mhm.
And it is true that like most students will, like everyone says, "Oh, my student's not a very good test taker," or my student gets a little nervous when they take tests." That is true of 90% of students, even the ones who act like they don't. They all do, right? But without good test prep strategies, the ACT often turns out to be not the better test because of those time pressure and the anxiety, right? The SAT gives you plenty of time. It's just much trickier. And for instance, the SAT has the non calculator math section. Well, students probably haven't done any math problems without a calculator in a long time, right?
Mhm.
So they are very distressed when they're suddenly not allowed to use a calculator. And the SAT reading section is written at a college reading level. And so trying to read and understand the SAT passages is near impossible for most students, whereas the ACT's reading section is written at an eighth grade reading level. And so students find it a lot easier to read. And if they just know, hey, you don't need to spend a lot of time reading and understanding it, you can focus your time on the questions. That right there changes the ball game for a lot of students. And so just literally explaining that strategy to a student usually immediately increases their score on the reading and science sections in a dramatic way, right? And so that's a big part of it, is just knowing those differences and knowing that you're not just locked into the SAT because it's the one that, you know, you're going to have the PSAT in the fall. The only reason that you would want to take the like focus on the SAT and PSAT, is if you're going to score in the top 1% of your state. That's where you get the National Merit Scholarship from. And that's from taking the PSAT the fall of your junior year in October.
Mhm.
Unless you're going to be in the top 1%, then there is no benefit to SAT versus ACT at all. They are completely equivalent, and you just pick the one that, you're likely to do the best on.
Right.
There
And
is, yeah, go
I've
ahead.
got I've got 2 kids and
Yeah,
one did better with ACT, one did better with SAT. So you just don't know.
absolutely. And so that's the other thing that kind of like puts this all together, which is the ACT covers a little more math material than the SAT does, which means it's probably covering things that you've learned more recently. So students might be more comfortable with that. But what that means is that if you learn test strategies for either test, it will benefit your score on both tests. But it is a little better to focus on the ACT since it covers more math and since it has the science section on it that the SAT doesn't. If you prepare for the ACT, you are also going to be very well prepared for the SAT. If you
Oh,
prepare for,
interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
so yeah.
just because there's more stuff. So the ACT prepares you for both. The SAT will prepare you well for both. But when you switch over to the ACT, you'll be like, oh, there's all these math questions like logarithms and matrices and things that weren't on the SAT. Oh, I didn't know that I need to prepare for that. And also there's this science section. And the thing is, like, it's not about learning a bunch of things you don't know how to do. It's about knowing how the test works and taking it until you're not scared of it and anxious about it. And instead, you do enough practice that you are bored with it. Because if you're bored, you're not anxious. And you're just like, okay, I've done this, 50 times before, 10 times before. And okay, I know I might miss this question because I don't know what it is, but I know I'm still going to get a good score because that's what I got in the practice tests. So the anxiety sometimes will go away if you've done enough practice.
Nice. So if you had to put this into, I don't know how many words, Bobby, because I
Right.
know you just talk about this, right?
Sure.
But um, just some quick tip SAT versus ACT dependent on your kid? What would you say?
Yeah. So if a student is good at math and likes and did reasonably well on the PSAT and is good at math and a really strong reader and is very anxious about time, right? So if you can do math without a calculator, you kind of like the tricky nature of the SAT but you like taking your time and get anxious about time management, then the SAT is going to be a better test.
Okay.
If your math score is lower than your verbal score, if your verbal score on the SAT is a lot higher than the SAT, then almost definitely you should focus on the ACT, because the ACT math is only 1/4 of your score and the SAT math is half your score. Like, that's the simplest answer to it, because on the ACT, you've got the English, the reading, and the science. And people might think that science is like math, but it is not. Science is just like reading. So the ACT test is 3/4 verbal reading stuff, 1/4 math. So you can go and get great scores on the 3 verbal sections or the 3 non-math sections on the ACT, and average that in with a lower math score and get a great score. And I think that's the most important thing, is really, if you are good at math and you hate the time pressure, take the SAT. If you are really good at verbal and are willing to not spend forever reading up front on the reading section and just go take the test, the ACT could turn out to be much better. But just make sure you get some good test strategies somewhere. You can purchase the Princeton Reviews, ACT Premium Prep, and SAT Premium Prep books. Those are great. Also, just talk to me. I am always happy to give advice to people. I'm happy to provide you with tests. And if you'd like to tutor with me, I'm always available to help with that. I can usually help a student in about 5 hours of tutoring, like really get an increase in their score. So I try to do it really efficiently instead of this long drawn out process that everybody else sees.
Right. And I'll tell you, take advantage of calling Bobby up if you've got specific questions about your child. He is wonderful to work with, and you will be happy you did. And he's so generous with his time, just to get you launched and figure out, what might be the best test for you, and then how he can help you. So, Bobby, thank you.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, that's the thing. Like, once a student, like, all my piece is get your score to where it represents you well as a person, right? And then after that, it's the college search process and figuring out how to get through college in a reasonable amount of time. And that's your area, right? You can help students figure out their strengths, figure out how to go to college and get done and get to the right major and go and be happy and successful in your career. And so it really works really nicely. That's it. I'm always happy to answer questions. There's a contact form on my website. Just fill it out and we can absolutely have a chat. Anyway, this has been great, Kristen. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Bobby.